Detective Sarah Mitchell had always dreamed of owning a home. For years, she saved every penny from her job as a police officer, imagining the day she'd finally have a place to call her own. When she found the perfect house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, it felt like everything was falling into place. The house wasn't too big or too small. It was just right. It had a cozy living room, a backyard with enough space for weekend barbecues, and a kitchen that made her want to try out all those recipes she'd bookmarked online. She signed the papers, got the keys, and moved in with a heart full of excitement. But little did Sarah know, moving into this neighborhood would come with its own set of challenges. The community was governed by a homeowners association, HOA, which meant there were rules, lots of them. Rules about what color you could paint your front door, how high your grass could grow, and even when you could park on the street. At first, Sarah thought these guidelines would help keep the neighborhood looking nice and orderly. But soon, she realized that not everyone followed the rules for the sake of harmony. Some people seemed to enjoy enforcing them a little too much. One person stood out above the rest: Karen Thompson. Karen was the unofficial queen of the HOA, always quick to point out any violations she noticed, whether it was someone's trash cans left out overnight, a car parked slightly over the curb, or a tree branch hanging a little too close to the sidewalk. Karen made sure everyone knew about it. She carried around a clipboard like it was her badge of authority, jotting down notes whenever she spotted something she didn't approve of. Her behavior earned her the nickname HOA Karen among the neighbors, though no one dared say it to her face. Sarah tried to stay on Karen's good side. After all, she wanted to be a good neighbor, so when Karen stopped by one afternoon to introduce herself and simultaneously remind Sarah about the HOA's strict noise policy, Sarah nodded politely and assured her she'd follow the rules. Karen gave her a tight smile before walking away, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender air freshener. From that moment on, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was watching her every move, waiting for her to slip up. Despite Karen's looming presence, Sarah was determined to make the best of her new life. She spent weekends painting walls, arranging furniture, and planting flowers in her garden. Each project brought her closer to making the house feel like home. And as she settled in, an idea began forming in her mind, an idea that would bring warmth and laughter to her doorstep. Little did she know, this decision would lead to one of the most unforgettable nights of her life. The stage was set, and Sarah was ready to embrace her new beginning. But living next door to someone like Karen, well, that was going to test her patience, and maybe even her sense of humor, in ways she never expected. After weeks of unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and making the house feel like home, Sarah decided it was time to celebrate. What better way to mark this new chapter of her life than with a housewarming party? She envisioned a cozy evening filled with good food, laughter, and the company of people who mattered most to her. Sarah loved bringing people together. It was one of the things that made her happiest. This wasn't going to be some extravagant event, just a simple gathering to share her joy with friends, family, and a few colleagues from the police department. But before diving into the planning, Sarah knew she had to consider her neighbors, especially Karen. With all the talk about HOA rules and noise restrictions, she wanted to make sure everything was above board. So, one afternoon, she walked over to Karen's house, plate of freshly baked cookies in hand. It was a small gesture, but Sarah hoped it would help smooth things over. When Karen opened the door, she looked surprised to see Sarah standing there, smiling politely. "Hi, Karen," Sarah said cheerfully. "I just wanted to let you know I'm hosting a little housewarming party this weekend. Nothing crazy, just close friends and family. We'll keep the music low and wrap things up by 10. Karen studied the plate of cookies for a moment before taking it, her expression unreadably neutral. "Well, I suppose that's fine," she replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Just remember, we do have rules here. No loud music, no parking on the street after 9, and absolutely no unruly behavior." Her words hung in the air like a warning, but Sarah nodded graciously. thanking her for understanding. Back at home, Sarah got to work planning the details. She sent out invitations to her closest friends, including her partner at the police station, Officer Mark Rivera, and their sergeant, Lisa Rodriguez. Everyone RSVP'd enthusiastically, promising to bring dishes to share. Sarah spent hours preparing snacks, mini sandwiches, veggie platters, and a homemade spinach dip that always seemed to disappear within minutes. She decorated the living room with string lights and balloons, adding a warm and welcoming touch to the space. As the day of the party approached, Sarah felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She double-checked everything. The playlist was ready, the food was prepped, and the backyard looked inviting with its twinkling fairy lights. Still, she couldn't shake the nagging thought of Karen lurking nearby, clipboard in hand. What if Karen decided to pop over unannounced? Or worse, call the authorities because someone laughed too loudly. The idea seemed ridiculous, but knowing Karen, it didn't feel entirely impossible. On the morning of the party, Sarah took a deep breath and reminded herself to relax. She had done everything she could to be a considerate neighbor, and the people coming were kind, respectful guests. Besides, how much trouble could a group of off-duty cops really cause? Smiling to herself, Sarah finished setting up the last few decorations and stepped back to admire her work. Everything looked perfect. Now all she needed was for her guests to arrive, and for Karen to stay far, far away. Little did Sarah know, the night ahead would turn out to be far more eventful than she ever imagined. But for now, she focused on the positive, looking forward to sharing her new home with the people she cared about most. After all, life was meant to be celebrated, and Sarah was ready to embrace every moment, even if it came with a side of HOA drama. The day of the housewarming party finally arrived, and Sarah was buzzing with excitement. As the sun began to set, she lit a few candles around the living room and adjusted the string lights in the backyard, making sure everything looked warm and inviting. The table was loaded with food, mini quiches, fruit platters, chips and dip, and a towering plate of brownies that smelled like pure happiness. She glanced at her watch, realizing her first guests would be arriving any minute. Everything felt perfect. When the doorbell rang, Sarah opened it to find her partner, Officer Mark Rivera, holding a tray of deviled eggs and a six-pack of soda. "Hey, newbie homeowner," he said with a grin. "This place looks amazing." Sarah laughed and thanked him as she ushered him inside. Soon after, more guests began trickling in. Friends from college, cousins who lived nearby, and fellow officers from the department. The house quickly filled with cheerful chatter, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Sarah made it a point to greet everyone personally, introducing them to one another if they hadn't met before. Her sergeant, Lisa Rodriguez, arrived with a bottle of sparkling cider, teasing Sarah about how much effort she clearly put into hosting. "You didn't have to go all out, you know," Lisa joked, gesturing to the decorations. "But I'm impressed." Sarah shrugged, smiling. "It's my first housewarming. I wanted it to feel special." As the evening went on, the atmosphere only grew warmer. Someone turned on the playlist Sarah had carefully curated, a mix of soft jazz and upbeat classics, and a few people started dancing in the living room. Plates of food were passed around, stories were shared, and Sarah couldn't help but feel proud of how well everything was going. Even the neighbors seemed unfazed. No one complained about noise, and the cars parked neatly along the driveway followed every HOA rule to the letter. But just as Sarah was cutting the first slice of cake, there was a sudden knock at the door. Confused, she excused herself and walked over to answer it. Standing on her porch were two uniformed officers, their expressions serious. One of them held a notepad while the other spoke. "Ma'am, we received a call about a loud disturbance at this address. Can you confirm what's happening here?" For a moment, Sarah froze, unsure how to respond. A loud disturbance. That didn't make sense. Her party was anything but rowdy. Before she could say anything, though, Karen appeared behind the officers, her face flushed, and her hands clutching her phone like it was evidence. "I'm the one who called," she announced loudly, stepping forward. "This is unacceptable. There's too much noise, and it's disturbing the neighborhood." Sarah blinked, trying to process the absurdity of the situation. Here she was, surrounded by off-duty police officers, being accused of throwing some wild, out-of-control bash. It was almost comical. But then she noticed something. Karen's eyes widened slightly as she glanced past Sarah into the house. For the first time, she seemed to realize exactly who was attending the party. The sea of uniforms, badges gleaming faintly in the light, must have hit her like a freight train. "Well," Sarah said calmly, crossing her arms, "you're welcome to come in and see for yourself. Everyone here is having a quiet, respectful evening." She gestured toward her guests, who were now watching curiously from inside. Some of them waved awkwardly at Karen, while others exchanged amused glances. The tension in the air was palpable, but Sarah refused to let Karen ruin the mood. If anything, this unexpected twist might just end up being the most memorable part of the night. Karen hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do next. And as Sarah stood there, flanked by 2 real-life police officers and backed by a crowd of her colleagues, she realized that sometimes life had a funny way of handling things for you. Karen's arrival on Sarah's porch felt like a scene straight out of a sitcom, but no one was laughing just yet. Her bathrobe was tied tightly around her waist, and her slippers scuffed against the concrete as she stepped forward, clutching her phone like it held the secrets to national security. "I'm telling you," she insisted, her voice rising slightly, "this is completely unacceptable. The noise level is far too high, and it's disturbing the peace." The 2 responding officers glanced at each other, their faces unreadable. They were clearly trying to assess the situation without jumping to conclusions. One of them turned back to Sarah and asked politely, "Ma'am, can you tell us what's going on here?" Sarah took a deep breath, keeping her tone calm and composed. "Of course," she said with a small smile. "I'm hosting a housewarming party for some friends and family. We've been careful to keep things quiet. It's mostly conversation and light music. I even checked with my neighbor earlier to let her know about the gathering." She gestured toward Karen, who suddenly looked less confident. Before Karen could respond, Officer Mark Rivera appeared behind Sarah, his arms crossed and an amused smirk playing on his lips. "Hey guys," he said casually to the responding officers. "What's up?" The officers' eyes widened slightly as they recognized him. "Oh, hey Rivera," one of them replied, clearly surprised. "Didn't realize this was your crew." That's when Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez joined the group, standing beside Sarah with her arms folded. "Everything okay out here?" she asked, raising an eyebrow at Karen, who now seemed frozen in place. It was becoming painfully obvious to everyone, including Karen, that this wasn't just any ordinary neighborhood party. Nearly every guest inside Sarah's house wore a badge. Karen's face flushed bright red as she stammered, "Well, I mean, their asterisk was asterisk noise. And it's late." And her voice trailed off as she realized how ridiculous she sounded. She glanced nervously at the officers surrounding her, then back at the crowd of uniformed guests peeking out from inside the house. Some of them waved awkwardly, while others tried, and failed, to suppress grins. Sergeant Rodriguez decided to step in, her tone firm but laced with humor. "Ma'am," she began, addressing Karen directly, "do you often call 911 for situations like this? Because we typically reserve emergency services for actual emergencies, like crimes or accidents, not for low-key gatherings where people are enjoying themselves responsibly." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But the HOA rules. She sputtered, grasping at straws. "There are guidelines about noise after 10 o'clock. Sarah nodded patiently, "And we're wrapping things up soon, just as promised. No one's being disruptive, and we followed all the rules. I made sure of that." By now, the tension had dissolved into something closer to entertainment. Several of Sarah's guests had wandered onto the porch to see what was happening, forming a semicircle around the group. Karen looked increasingly flustered as she realized she was outnumbered, not just by regular neighbors, but by law enforcement professionals who probably knew more about proper conduct than she ever would. One of the responding officers broke the awkward silence with a chuckle. "Looks like everything's under control here," he said, glancing at his partner. "We'll head out, but try to keep the volume down, okay?" "Absolutely," Sarah replied, smiling brightly. "Thanks for stopping by." As the officers walked away, Karen stood rooted to the spot, her clipboard forgotten in her hand. For a moment, she looked like she might say something else. But instead, she muttered a quiet apology before hurrying back to her house, her bathrobe fluttering behind her. Back inside, the mood shifted from tense to uproarious. Laughter erupted as everyone processed what had just happened. Wow, Karen really thought she could shut down a room full of cops. Someone joked, earning a round of applause. Sarah shook her head, still processing the absurdity of it all. What started as a peaceful evening had turned into a story none of them would forget anytime soon. And as the night wound down, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Not because she'd embarrassed Karen, but because she'd proven that kindness and respect could win over pettiness. Sometimes, life served up moments so perfect they almost felt scripted. This was one of those nights. The aftermath of Karen's ill-fated 911 calls spread through the neighborhood faster than anyone could have anticipated. By the next morning, it seemed like everyone knew what had happened. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves suddenly found excuses to chat with Sarah when they saw her outside, whether it was to compliment her gardening or simply ask how she was settling in. It was clear that Karen's attempt to assert her authority had backfired spectacularly, and people weren't shy about sharing their opinions. At first, Karen tried to play it cool. She emerged from her house the following afternoon, sunglasses perched on her nose and a tote bag slung over her shoulder, pretending as though nothing unusual had occurred. But the whispers followed her wherever she went. A group of teenagers mowing lawns exchanged smirks as she walked by. Mrs. Peterson from across the street gave her a tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Even Mr. Dawson, the retired mechanic who rarely spoke to anyone, tipped his hat to Sarah while pointedly ignoring Karen altogether. Sarah, for her part, didn't gloat. She understood that living in a community meant finding ways to coexist peacefully, even with difficult neighbors. Still, she couldn't deny the small sense of satisfaction that came with knowing karma had done its job. When Karen finally approached her a few days later, Sarah braced herself for another lecture, or at least an awkward apology. "Listen," Karen began haltingly, fidgeting with the strap of her purse, "about the other night. I may have overreacted. It's just, well, you know how important it is to follow the rules around here." Sarah nodded slowly, choosing her words carefully. "I get it, Karen. Rules are important. But so is communication. If something bothers you, maybe try talking to me directly instead of calling 911. That way, we can avoid misunderstandings." Karen blinked, clearly caught off guard by Sarah's calm demeanor. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but then she sighed and nodded reluctantly. "You're right. I'll try to do better." With that, she turned and hurried back to her house, leaving Sarah standing there with a mixture of relief and amusement. Word of Sarah's grace in handling the situation only added to her growing reputation in the neighborhood. People began to see her not just as the friendly new homeowner, but as someone who could diffuse tension without resorting to drama. One neighbor even joked, "If Karen ever tries to come after me, I'm calling *you* instead of 911. As the weeks passed, Karen became noticeably quieter. She still attended HOA meetings, but her clipboard remained tucked under her arm more often than not. Gone were the unsolicited comments about lawn maintenance or parking violations. Instead, she kept to herself, occasionally offering polite nods to Sarah when their paths crossed. It wasn't exactly friendship, but it was progress. And for now, that felt like enough. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to build connections within the community. She hosted another gathering a month later, a casual Saturday afternoon barbecue this time, and made sure to invite all her immediate neighbors, including Karen. To her surprise, Karen actually showed up, bringing along a plate of store-bought cookies as a peace offering. While she didn't stay long, her presence signaled a shift in their dynamic. The icy tension between them began to thaw, replaced by cautious civility. Looking back on that chaotic night, Sarah realized it had taught her something valuable. Conflict wasn't always about winning or losing. Sometimes it was about finding common ground, even with someone as challenging as Karen. And while she doubted they'd ever become best friends, she was grateful for the lesson in patience and diplomacy. After all, life was too short to let petty disagreements overshadow the joy of building a home and a community you could truly love. Though Karen's antics had provided plenty of entertainment, Sarah knew the real victory wasn't in embarrassing her neighbor. It was in proving that kindness and understanding could go a long way, even in the most unexpected situations. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah noticed a subtle but undeniable change in the neighborhood. The tension that had once lingered in the air seemed to dissolve, replaced by a newfound sense of camaraderie among the residents. It wasn't just Karen who had toned down her behavior. Other neighbors also appeared more relaxed and open, as if the incident at Sarah's housewarming had somehow loosened the grip of rigid HOA rules on everyone's lives. Karen, in particular, underwent a quiet transformation. She no longer patrolled the streets with her clipboard, scrutinizing every minor infraction. Instead, she kept to herself, occasionally waving or offering a polite hello when she passed Sarah on the sidewalk. While their interactions remained brief and formal, there was an unspoken understanding between them now. They were both trying to move forward. Sarah appreciated this shift, even if it came with small, awkward moments. For instance, one morning, Karen left a handwritten note on Sarah's doorstep thanking her for keeping her yard tidy. The gesture was unexpected and slightly stiff, but Sarah couldn't help but smile. It was progress. The rest of the neighborhood took notice too. Longtime residents who had grown weary of Karen's constant complaints began to breathe easier. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman across the street, confided in Sarah over coffee one afternoon that she hadn't realized how much stress Karen's antics had caused until they stopped. "It's like we can all finally relax," she said with a laugh. "I think you did us all a favor, dear." Sarah shrugged modestly, deflecting the praise. "I didn't do anything special," she replied. Sometimes people just need a little wake-up call. Still, she couldn't deny the positive ripple effect her housewarming party had created. Neighbors who rarely spoke before started organizing weekend get-togethers, a casual book club here, a potluck dinner there. Even Mr. Dawson, the reserve mechanic, joined in, surprising everyone by hosting a summer barbecue in his backyard. For Sarah, these changes reinforced why she had fallen in love with the idea of owning a home in the first place. It wasn't just about having four walls and a roof. It was about creating a space where memories could be made and relationships could grow. Her housewarming party may have started as a simple celebration, but it ended up being the catalyst for something bigger, a reminder that communities thrive when people choose kindness over conflict. Of course, life wasn't without its challenges. There were still moments of friction, like when someone accidentally blocked a driveway or forgot to mow their lawn on time. But instead of escalating into heated arguments, these issues were resolved through conversation rather than confrontation. Sarah often found herself mediating small disputes, using her experience as a detective to listen carefully and find solutions that worked for everyone involved. Over time, she earned a reputation not just as a good neighbor, but as someone others could rely on when tensions ran high. Looking back, Sarah realized how much she had grown since moving into the neighborhood. She had entered this chapter of her life eager to start fresh, but she hadn't anticipated the lessons she would learn along the way. Dealing with Karen had taught her patience and diplomacy, while hosting gatherings had shown her the power of bringing people together. Most importantly, She discovered that building a community wasn't about perfection. It was about effort, empathy, and a willingness to meet people halfway. One evening, as Sarah sat on her porch watching the sunset, she reflected on how far she'd come. The house felt truly like home now, not just because of the furniture or decorations, but because of the connection she had forged. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson waved from her garden, and next door, Karen watered her plants with quiet determination. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Life rarely worked that way. But it was real, imperfect, and beautiful in its own way. And as Sarah raised her cup of tea in a silent toast to the neighborhood, she knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, the most memorable stories are the ones that remind us of our shared humanity. Months after the infamous housewarming party, Sarah's life in the neighborhood had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The chaos of Karen's 911 call was now a distant memory, though it occasionally resurfaced during lighthearted conversations at neighborhood gatherings. People still chuckled about the night Karen called the cops on the cops, and Sarah didn't mind sharing the story. It had become part of her identity as the friendly new neighbor who brought everyone together. Karen, for her part, seemed to have embraced a quieter existence. She no longer patrolled the streets with her clipboard or complained about every minor infraction. Instead, she focused on her own home, tending to her garden with surprising dedication. Her flowers bloomed vibrantly that summer, earning compliments from several neighbors, including Sarah. One afternoon, when Sarah stopped by to admire Karen's handiwork, Karen surprised her by saying, "You know, gardening is kind of therapeutic. It helps me relax." Sarah smiled warmly, realizing this might be Karen's way of finding peace, not just with the neighborhood, but with herself. The community as a whole continued to evolve in small, meaningful ways. Inspired by Sarah's example, other residents began hosting their own events, creating opportunities for neighbors to bond. Mrs. Peterson started a monthly book club that quickly gained popularity, while Mr. Dawson organized a weekend car washing session where everyone pitched in to clean their vehicles and share snacks. Even Karen attended one of these events, a casual outdoor movie night hosted by Sarah. And though she stayed only briefly, her presence signaled a step toward inclusion. Sarah found herself cherishing these moments more than she ever expected. As someone who spent her days solving problems and navigating conflicts as a detective, she appreciated the simplicity of neighborhood life. Hosting get-togethers became her favorite way to unwind, whether it was a cozy fall-themed dinner or an impromptu game night. Each event brought laughter, connection, and a sense of belonging that made her house feel even more like home. Reflecting on everything that had happened, Sarah realized how much she had grown since moving in. Dealing with Karen's antics had tested her patience, but it also taught her valuable lessons about resilience and diplomacy. She learned that conflict didn't have to end in bitterness. Sometimes, it could lead to understanding and growth. More importantly, she discovered the power of kindness, how a single act of grace could transform not just a relationship, but an entire community. As autumn arrived, painting the trees in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah decided to host one last gathering before winter set in. This time, she invited everyone on the block, including Karen, to celebrate the season with hot cider, pumpkin pie, and a bonfire in the backyard. To her delight, nearly all her neighbors showed up, bringing blankets, chairs, and stories to share around the fire. Even Karen lingered longer than usual, sitting quietly as she listened to others reminisce about summers past and plans for the future. That night, as sparks from the fire danced against the dark sky, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had entered this neighborhood hoping to build a home, but what she found was something far richer, a community. It wasn't perfect, no place ever was, but it was real, full of warmth and shared experiences, and as she looked around at the faces illuminated by the flickering flames, she knew she wouldn't trade it for anything. In the end, Sarah's journey was about more than just standing up to Karen or throwing a memorable party. It was about learning to navigate challenges with humor and grace, building bridges instead of walls, and finding joy in the everyday moments that made life worth living. Her housewarming may have been the starting point, but the true celebration was the connection she had nurtured along the way. And so, as the fire crackled softly and laughter filled the air, Sarah raised her mug of cider in a quiet toast. To neighbors, to friendships, and to the unexpected twists that make life such a beautiful adventure.